Christmas morning, December 25th, 1995, Beverly Hills, California. The sun rose slowly over the Hollywood Hills, casting long shadows across the pristine lawns and manicured gardens of one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the world. Inside a sprawling mansion on Doheny Drive, an old man woke up alone. His name was Dean Martin. He was 78 years old. His body was frail, his breathing labored. Emphysema from decades of chain smoking had ravaged his lungs. His voice, once one of the smoothest in entertainment history, was now barely more than a whisper. But it was Christmas morning, and even in his declining health, Dean Martin felt something he hadn't felt in years. A spark of something. Hope, maybe. Or perhaps just the ghost of memories from better times. Dean pulled himself out of bed slowly. Every movement was deliberate, calculated to conserve energy. He shuffled across the cold hardwood floor in his slippers, his silk robe draped loosely over his skeletal frame. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been quiet for years now, ever since Dino died. That's what everyone called his son, Dino. Not Dean Paul, though that was his name. To Dean Martin, he would always be Dino, little Dino, the greatest joy of his life, the light that had gone out 8 years ago, on March 21st, 1987. The living room was dark when Dean entered. The curtains were drawn, as they almost always were these days. Dean made his way to the window and pulled them open slowly. Sunlight flooded in, harsh and unforgiving. The room was decorated for Christmas, though Dean didn't remember decorating it. His housekeeper must have done it. A tree stood in the corner, decorated with ornaments, but with no presents underneath. There was no one left to give presents to. No grandchildren playing on the floor. No family gathered around the fireplace. Just Dean, alone in a mansion full of memories. He sat down in his favorite chair, the same chair where he'd sat every day for the past 8 years, watching old home videos, listening to records, drinking. The bottle of scotch was still on the side table from the night before, half empty. Dean picked it up and looked at it, then set it back down. Too early, even for him. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to the days when Christmas meant something, when Christmas meant Dino would come home. Dino, born November 17th, 1951. Dean had been 34 years old when his son was born, fresh off a string of hit movies, riding high on success, feeling invincible. He remembered the moment the doctor had placed baby Dino in his arms. He remembered thinking that nothing in his life, not the fame, not the awards, not the money, nothing compared to this moment. This tiny human being who was part of him, who carried his name, who would carry on his legacy. But Dino hadn't just carried on his legacy. Dino had created his own. By the time he was a teenager, Dino was a tennis champion. As a young man, he'd formed a successful pop-rock duo called Dino, Desi, and Billy that had hits on the radio. He'd pursued acting, appearing in films and television, and most impressively, he'd become a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom fighter jets. Dino was everything Dean had wanted him to be: talented, humble, brave, independent, successful on his own merits, not riding his father's coattails. Their relationship had been the purest thing in Dean Martin's life, in a career built on performing, on creating an image, on being the cool guy who didn't care about anything. Dean had let his guard down completely with his son. Dino was the one person in the world who knew the real Dean Martin, not the entertainer, not the legend, just a man, a father who loved his boy more than life itself. The memories were painful. Each one was a knife wound that had never healed. Dean's eyes opened. He stood up slowly and walked over to a cabinet in the corner of the living room. It was made of dark mahogany, beautiful and ornate. He opened it carefully. Inside, on a small shelf, was a collection of home videos, hours and hours of footage. Dino playing tennis as a kid, Dino graduating from high school, Dino in his Air Force uniform, Dino and Dean together, laughing, talking, being father and son. Dean pulled out one of the tapes at random. It was labeled in his own handwriting. Dino, age 12, tennis tournament. He carried it over to the television and inserted it into the VCR. The screen flickered to life. There was Dino, 12 years old, standing on a tennis court in the California sun. He was tall for his age, athletic, with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp features. He was playing against another boy, moving across the court with grace and precision. In the background, barely visible, was Dean, filming his son, not saying anything, just capturing the moment. Dean watched it for a few minutes, then ejected the tape and put in another one. This one showed Dino as a young man, maybe 20 years old, in his Air Force uniform. He looked so proud, so confident. He was talking about flying, about how it made him feel free, like he could touch the sky and leave all his problems behind. Dean had recorded this footage just 5 years before Dino died. 5 years. A blink of an eye. How many times had Dean watched these videos in the past 8 years? Thousands. Tens of thousands. He'd memorized every word, every gesture, every expression on Dino's face. He could watch them in his sleep. In fact, he often did. He'd fall asleep in his chair with the videos playing, and Dino would be there with him all night long, frozen in time, forever young, forever perfect. Dean ejected the tape and turned off the television. His chest was tight. Breathing was difficult. He made his way back to his chair and sat down heavily. He picked up the scotch bottle and took a long drink straight from it. The liquid burned his throat, but he welcomed the pain. Pain was real. Pain meant he was still alive. And part of him, a very large part of him, wasn't sure he wanted to be. The house was silent again. Christmas morning? Silence. The kind of silence that made you feel like the world had ended, like you were the only person left. Dean thought about his other children. Claudia, Gail, Ricci, and Deanna. They'd all tried to stay close to him after Dino died. They'd visited him, called him, tried to pull him back into the world. But it was impossible. He wasn't their father anymore. He was just a shell. A ghost haunting his own house. Deanna had been the most persistent. His youngest daughter had visited him every single day for the first 6 months after the funeral. She'd brought him food, tried to get him to go outside, to talk, to do anything that would indicate he was still among the living. But Dean was unreachable. It was like he had died with Dino. His body continued to exist, but his soul was gone, wandering somewhere else, looking for his boy. After 6 months, Deanna had stopped coming as often. She had her own family, her own life to live. Eventually, her visits became less frequent, once a month, then once every few months. Then they stopped altogether. Dean didn't blame her. What was the point? What could she do? You can't fix a broken father. You can't mend a heart that's been shattered into pieces. Dean stood up again and walked to the window. Outside, on Doheny Drive, he could see families walking past. Parents with children, some of them holding hands, laughing together. The sight made Dean's stomach turn. Those people had no idea how quickly it could all be taken away. They had no idea how fragile life was, how precious each moment was. They were living as if they had forever, but nobody had forever. Dean had learned that lesson the hard way. He thought about the day Dino died, March 21st, 1987. He'd been on stage at Bal's Casino in Las Vegas, singing Everybody Loves Somebody to a packed house of 5,000 people. He was in the middle of the song when he saw Eddie Marsh, his road manager, in the wings with a phone. Eddie's face was ashen, and Dean knew. Somehow, in that instant, Dean knew that something catastrophic had happened. The phone call came through. A colonel from the California Air National Guard. Dean Paul's F-4 Phantom had crashed during a training exercise in the San Bernardino Mountains. No survivors. Those words would be etched into Dean's brain forever. No survivors. As if there was any doubt. As if his son was just missing, and they were still looking for him. And maybe, just maybe, by some miracle, he would be found alive. But there was no miracle. Dino was gone. Completely gone. 8 years had passed since that day, and Dean had not recovered. Not even a little. In fact, he'd only gotten worse. After the funeral, he'd tried to continue performing. He'd attempted a reunion tour with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., but he couldn't do it. Every time he stepped on stage, he felt like he was committing a sin. How could he sing? How could he make people laugh and dance and forget their problems when his own son was dead? How could he pretend everything was okay when everything was fundamentally broken? So he quit. He canceled his shows. He stopped performing. He stopped living. He just existed in this house, day after day, watching videos of a boy who would never grow old, never fall in love, never get married, never have children of his own. Dino would be 34 years old now if he were alive, the same age Dean had been when Dino was born, and Dean would never get to know what his son would have become. Christmas morning, 1995. Dean looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7 in the morning, Christmas morning. The most wonderful time of the year, they said. Dean thought it was the worst time of the year. This was when the pain was the most acute. This was when the absence was the most noticeable. This was when Dean missed Dino the most. He walked slowly back to the cabinet and opened it again. But this time, he didn't reach for the videos. He reached for something behind them, a small wooden box, beautifully crafted, made of Italian walnut. Inside this box was Dino's last letter to him. It had arrived 2 weeks before Dino died, sent by mail from March Air Force Base. Dean had kept it sealed for 8 years. He couldn't bring himself to read it. As long as he didn't read it, it could still be from Dino, still carrying his voice, still connecting them across the distance. But today, on Christmas morning, Dean felt like maybe it was time. Maybe it was time to finally read what his son had written to him. Dean's hands trembled as he opened the box and carefully removed the envelope. It was addressed to him in Dino's neat, precise handwriting. To Dad. 2 words, but they contained everything. Dean sat back down in his chair and slowly opened the envelope. The paper inside was soft, worn from being handled so many times over the years, even though Dean hadn't actually looked at it since the day it arrived. He unfolded it carefully and began to read. Dear Dad, I'm sitting here at the base, and it's a beautiful day. The sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I was thinking about you today and about what you said to me the last time we talked. You said that you were proud of me. I want you to know that hearing you say that meant more to me than anything in the world. More than any award, more than any success, more than anything, because all my life I've wanted to make you proud, and it's not easy, you know, having a famous father. Everyone always expects you to be like him or better than him or to follow in his footsteps, but you never pushed me. You never said I had to do anything. You just supported whatever I chose to do, and that's why I've been able to figure out who I am, independent of you. Flying is the thing that makes me feel most alive. When I'm up in that cockpit, nothing else matters. It's just me and the sky. I feel like I can touch heaven. I feel free in a way that nothing else can give me. I hope you understand why I love it so much. I hope you know that even when I'm flying thousands of feet in the air, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about how you've shown me that you can be a legend, you can be famous, and you can still be a good man. You can still be a good father. Not many people can do that, but you did. You made it look easy. I'm going to do my best to be a good man, too. Not as famous as you, probably. I'm not sure I want that, but good nonetheless. In my own way. I love you, Dad. More than I can express in a letter. But I wanted you to know. Dino. Dean read the letter through tears. When he finished, he couldn't move. He just sat there, holding the paper, unable to breathe, unable to think. The words swam before his eyes. All his life, I've wanted to make you proud. He felt like I can touch heaven. I'm thinking about you. Dean Martin had never shown much emotion in public. That was his brand. That was what made him cool. The guy who never let anything bother him. The performer who could make the audience laugh even when his own heart was breaking. But here, alone in his living room on Christmas morning, with a letter from his dead son in his hands, Dean Martin broke completely. He wept. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far away, from the deepest part of his soul. He cried for Dino. He cried for all the years they should have had together. He cried for all the conversations they should have had, the advice he should have given, the wisdom he should have imparted. He cried for the grandchildren he would never meet, the legacy that had been cut short, the future that would never happen. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the crying stopped. Dean sat up in his chair, the letter still clutched in his hand. He looked around the living room at all the things he'd accumulated over his lifetime. The awards, the photographs, the memorabilia from his career. All of it seemed so meaningless now, All of it was just dust. None of it mattered. The only thing that had ever mattered was Dino, and Dino was gone. Dean got up and walked over to the television again. He put in another video. This one was different. This one showed Dean and Dino together, at home, in this very room, about a year before Dino died. Dino was 25 years old. He was telling his father about flying, about his dreams, about his life. And Dean was listening, really listening, not performing, not being the cool guy, just being a father. Dean watched his son's face on the screen. He watched the way Dino smiled when he talked about the things he loved. He watched the way his son looked at him with so much love and respect. And Dean realized something. He realized that even though Dino was gone, he was also still here. He was here in these videos. He was here in the memory of that letter. He was here in every moment they'd shared, every conversation, every laugh, every time Dean had put his arm around his son's shoulder and told him how proud he was. Dino was dead, but he was also immortal. He would live on in Dean's memory forever. He would live on in the hearts of everyone who had known him. He would live on in the example he'd set, in the kindness he'd shown, in the love he'd expressed to his father in that letter. Dean sat there for hours, watching the video over and over again. He watched his son's face. He listened to his son's voice. And gradually, something shifted inside him. The pain didn't go away. It would never go away. But it transformed into something else. It transformed into gratitude. Gratitude for the time they'd had together. Gratitude for the memories. Gratitude for a son who had been everything Dean could have hoped for. As the sun began to set on Christmas Day, Dean made a decision. He couldn't bring Dino back. He couldn't change the past. But he could honor his son's memory. He could live the life Dino would have wanted him to live. Not hiding in this house, not drowning in grief, but living, really living, celebrating the time they'd had together instead of mourning the time they'd lost. Dean picked up the phone. It took a long time for someone to answer, but eventually, Deanna picked up on the other end. "Deanna, it's Dad. Merry Christmas, sweetheart." There was a long pause on the other end, then his daughter's voice, surprised and full of emotion. "Dad, are you okay? It's been so long since I heard your voice." "I know, honey. I'm sorry. I know I've been absent. I know I haven't been the father you deserved. But I want to change that. I want to spend time with you. I want to know your family. I want to be a grandfather. Not the kind of grandfather who sits alone in his house all day, but a real grandfather, a real father." Deanna was crying on the other end. She said yes. Of course she said yes. She'd been waiting 8 years for her father to come back to life, and on Christmas morning, 1995, he finally did. Dean hung up the phone and sat back in his chair. He was still sad. He would always be sad. The loss of Dino was a wound that would never fully heal. But for the first time in 8 years, Dean Martin felt something other than despair. He felt hope. He felt the desire to live again. He felt the beginning of acceptance. He looked at the television where Dino's face still appeared on the screen, frozen in time, forever young, forever smiling, and Dean said something he hadn't said in years. "I love you, Dino. Thank you for being my son. Thank you for making me proud. I'm going to do my best to make you proud too. I'm going to live the life you would have wanted me to live." And in that moment, in his living room on Christmas morning, Dean Martin began his journey back from the dead. He would never fully recover from the loss of his son. Nobody could. But he would learn to live with it. He would learn to transform his grief into something meaningful. He would learn to honor Dino's memory by being a better father, a better grandfather, a better man. 8 years later, on Christmas morning, 2003, Dean Martin would pass away. But in those final 8 years, he would spend more time with his family than he had in decades. He would tell stories about Dino to his grandchildren. He would watch them grow up and become people he was proud of. He would find peace, not complete peace, but enough peace to allow him to live with dignity and grace. And on that final Christmas morning in 2003, when Dean Martin took his last breath, his family was with him. His children were there, his grandchildren were there, and somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Dino was waiting to welcome his father home. But that's a story for another time. This story, the story of Christmas morning 1995, is the story of a man learning to live again. It's the story of how grief, when transformed with love and gratitude, can become the very thing that saves us. It's the story of Dean Martin, the coolest guy in show business, finally allowing himself to feel everything he'd been holding in for 8 long years. Christmas morning came and went. The sun set over Beverly Hills. The new year arrived. But something had fundamentally changed in Dean Martin's heart. He had found his way back to the living, and he would spend whatever time he had left celebrating the memory of his son and the profound love that had connected them across the boundaries of life and death. That's what was in the living room on Christmas morning, 1995. Not just a broken old man, but the beginning of redemption. The beginning of a father learning that the best way to honor the dead is to truly live. Truly.